In the last video, we introduced an enum into our application to represent the possible outcomes of a match. I want to now give you a couple quick notes around enums just to help you understand exactly what they are and when to use them. Alright, so quick diagram. So first off, when we make use of enums, we can work with them with just about identical syntax as normal objects. So in other words, we can reference an enum by just writing out its name, and we can access any of the different properties inside of here by writing out a dot and then the different option. So like away win, draw, or home win. This syntax right here would give us the result capital D, like so. You can also make use of enums without this equals syntax as well. So we could just put down home win, away win, and draw. Now you're probably really curious about why we would do this, and we will look at an example of this later on. For right now, I just want you to know that it is possible to define an enum without any values inside of it. Okay. Next up, these enums are so closely related to objects in normal JavaScript that in reality, when we take an enum from Typescript and convert it into JavaScript, like in other words, when we pass our code through a compiler, the outcome is an object. So I took the enum we just created and I threw it into a TypeScript playground really quickly. So on the left-hand side, you can see our enum. On the right-hand side, I know this code is a little bit hard to read, but essentially they are creating an object called matchResult and then just assigning it a couple of different properties. So if, for example, home win is going to have a value of H, away win will have a value of A, and so on. Next up, really important to understand here because when you learn about enums, you're probably going to be thinking, what in the world is the point of these? Again, the entire goal of an enum is just to signal to other engineers that these are all very closely related values. There's not necessarily any huge advantage out of using an enum when it comes to just working with the TypeScript compiler. The big goal here is signaling to other engineers and conveying the purpose of your code that you are writing. And then finally, you and I are going to try to use enums anytime that we have a small fixed set of values that are all very closely related, and we know those values at compile time. Now the last part right there, known at compile time, is really important to understand. When we write out an enum, we have to list out all the different possible outcomes or possible related values inside the enum. We cannot come back later on while our code is running and start to add in some more options. So in other words, we have to list out all these enum options while we are writing our code, and we cannot rely upon something like, say, a network request to add new values to the enum while our code is running. A better way, or a more kind of relevant way for what we're doing right here, maybe we did not have access, let's imagine that we didn't have access to this entire football.csv file ahead of time, and maybe you and I did not know that the possible outcomes of a match were H, A, and D. So in that case, we would not be making use of an enum, because if we wanted to figure out the possible outcomes of a match, we would have to iterate over all these different matches and inspect that column 5, like match 5, match 5, match 5, and then only when our code is running would we know that the possible outcomes are H, A, and D. So again, we're only going to use an enum when we know all these possible values while we are writing our code. Now that part is like kind of challenging to understand, so I'm going to give you a couple of very practical examples here. So on this list are a couple of different scenarios. We're going to go through each one and decide whether or not these would be good times to try to use an enum. So let's try going through this quick exercise. All right, so first off, should we use an enum to represent the different primary colors on a color picker? Well, primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. We know those possible values right now. Like we don't have to make a network request or run any code to figure out the different primary colors. So I'd say yes, it would be appropriate to use an enum to represent the primary colors. Okay, next one. Should we use an enum to represent the set of movie categories on Netflix? In this case, the movie categories on Netflix might be changing over time. Movies come and go on Netflix all the time, and they might be actively adding different categories like every single different day. In addition, we don't really know the entire list of movie categories while we are writing our code unless we went out and got direct access to Netflix's list of movie categories. Netflix might expose an API that we could use to figure out those categories, but that would require us to try to run some code, essentially while we are running our application, to figure out what those categories are. So I would say that we should probably not use an enum to represent movie categories on Netflix specifically. How about the different titles of all blog posts by a particular user? Well, I think this one would be pretty easy. We should definitely not use an enum here because we don't really know all the different titles of all the different blog posts for a particular user while we are running our code. We would have to, again, make a network request to find all the different blog posts that a particular user has created, and that would take place while we are actually running our code. So we would definitely not know these titles soon enough. All right, how about sizes of drink on an ordering menu? Well, when you're ordering a drink, traditionally the different options are small, medium, and large. That's a very small set of values. We know them all right now, and they're all very closely related. So I think this would be a great time to use an enum. How about all the years since the year 1750? Now, in this case, we definitely know the entire set of years from 1750. It's 1751, 52, 53, and so on. However, this would be a very large set of values. And in general, we only use an enum where we've got a rather small set of values, like maybe at the very top end, 10 or 15. And so I think that the entire set of years since 1750 would probably be too many values. So I'd say, no, we probably should not use an enum here. All right, how about the read status of a text message? Well, a text message can really either be unread, read, or maybe like not sent or something like that. And we know the possible values of that while we are compiling or writing our code. So I'd say that this would be also a good time to represent or use an enum to represent the possible statuses of a text message. All right, so once again, using enums, just a little bit tricky because the real purpose is just signaling to other engineers. This is definitely one of those features of TypeScript where I don't really expect you will be using it that often, but like everything else, I just want you to know that this feature exists. All right, so now we've got a better idea of how enums work. Let's take a quick pause right here and continue improving our application in the next video.